Russia is running out of fuel. The consequences are terrifying. Somewhere in Siberia, right now, a truck driver has been sitting in the same line for over 24 hours. He hasn't moved more than a few hundred meters. His cargo is rotting in the back. And on state television, thousands of miles away, the anchors are telling the country that everything is fine. This isn't a war story. This isn't a sanctions story. This is what happens when the largest country on Earth quietly runs out of the one thing it needs to hold itself together: fuel. On the surface, this looks like a temporary shortage. Annoying, but manageable. Something a government fixes in a few weeks. In reality, it's exposing a fault line that runs under the entire Russian economy. Here's the problem nobody talks about. Russia isn't one connected country. It's 11 time zones stitched together by roads. There's no dense rail grid like Europe, no coastal shipping lanes doing the heavy lifting. If a truck can't move, nothing behind it moves either. Not food, not medicine, not military supplies. And in 2026, trucks across Russia started stopping. In the city of Chita, deep in Siberia, drivers began filming lines of trucks stretching toward gas stations that simply had nothing to give them. In one widely shared clip, a driver claims he waited 39 hours just to fill his tank. Whether that number is exact or not, the fact that it's believable says everything about how bad things had gotten. But then, something more telling started happening. Drivers stopped waiting. In Zabaykalsky Krai, some simply parked their 50-ton rigs on the shoulder of the highway, cargo still inside, and walked away. Not because they were desperate for attention, but because doing the math on 39 hours of fuel versus a factory waiting on a shipment, walking away was the rational choice. That's when the story stops being about traffic and starts being about survival. Picture a family farm in the middle of harvest season. The wheat is ready. The combine harvester needs diesel to run. There isn't any. One farmer, filmed for social media, said his crew might have to bring back sickles, the same tool Russian peasants used a century ago, just to save the crop by hand. When a modern nuclear power is one gas station away from medieval farming tools, that's not a shortage, that's a system failure. So how does an oil-exporting country run out of gas? According to Russian business daily Izvestia, the trucking industry was already in trouble before the fuel crisis even hit. Interest rates had been pushed to 21% by the central bank, making it nearly impossible for smaller operators to finance new trucks. Sanctions had cut off spare parts for the Western trucks, Volvo and Scania, that once formed the backbone of the industry. Nearly 7,000 logistics companies were already in bankruptcy or liquidation by the end of 2025, the worst figure in 17 years. Izvestia now estimates that close to 30% of the country's remaining trucking companies are teetering on the edge. That's the setup. The fuel crisis wasn't the disease. It was the moment the disease became visible. Here's where things get bigger than one industry. Russia's trade lifeline to the outside world increasingly runs through a single corridor, the Trans-Siberian route to China. In 2024, trade between the two countries hit a record $245 billion, a number Vladimir Putin himself publicly celebrated. But according to Kommersant, daily driving distances on that same China route have collapsed from roughly 600 to 700 kilometers a day down to just 500, because trucks keep stopping for fuel that isn't there. Every stall adds a day. Every added day pushes the cost of moving one truckload from the Chinese border to Moscow higher, reportedly toward $10,000 per shipment. You'd think the obvious fix is simple. Put the freight on trains instead. Except Russia's railways are collapsing too. State-owned Russian Railways, which carries nearly 87% of the country's freight, reported its worst year in 16 years in 2025, weighed down by a debt pile of roughly 4 trillion rubles, about $50 billion. Hundreds of thousands of rail cars, close to a third of the entire fleet, sit idle and unused, clogging the very tracks that are supposed to be moving cargo. So if the roads are stalling and the rails are broke, what about the skies? That's the twist nobody expected. Air cargo, the supposed backup plan, might be the weakest link of all. Aviation fuel prices spiked so violently that the Kremlin was forced to temporarily ban jet fuel exports, the same emergency measure it used for gasoline, just to keep domestic flights running. Meanwhile, sanctions have starved Russian airlines of spare parts for their Western-made Boeing and Airbus jets, forcing some carriers to cannibalize grounded planes just to keep others flying. Add Ukrainian drone strikes that periodically shut down airports entirely, and air transport isn't a solution, it's another symptom. Roads stalling, rails broke, skies unreliable. There is no backup system left. So what does that actually mean for a Russian family? It shows up first in small ways. Fewer choices on the shelf, fresh vegetables and milk becoming harder to find. Then it shows up in the price tag. Russian officials reported staple food prices, potatoes, onions, cabbage, jumping sharply within weeks. It shows up in pharmacies too. Russia imports nearly all its raw pharmaceutical ingredients, much of it from China and India. And every one of those imports still needs a truck for the final mile, including refrigerated trucks for insulin and vaccines that simply cannot wait in a 39-hour line. And it shows up on the battlefield. An army runs on the same trucks a supermarket does: fuel, ammunition, spare parts. Analysts say Ukraine has been deliberately targeting Russia's fuel and logistics vehicles, straining resupply lines in Crimea and along the southern front faster than Moscow can rebuild them. Which raises the question everyone eventually asks: could this actually break the regime? Most Russia analysts say no, at least not soon. Moscow-based political analyst Andrei Kolesnikov has noted that public fatigue is turning into anger. But in a system with no real mechanism for change, that anger rarely turns into organized protest.